Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, what are rights and where do they come from? Today I have two fellow podcasters and friends on the show, and we're going to discuss just that. I'm joined by Jacob Daniel and Chris Polk.
Right. We'd rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live what he said. I ain't scared. I will take one to the head. Go ahead. So it's safe to say that I'm bad. So it's safe to say that I'm bad. So it's safe to say that I'm bad. So it's safe to say that.
Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. While I've got you on and you're new to the show, why don't you give us a little background of yourself, and then I want you to tell us a little bit about your path to anarchism.
It started back in about 2008 during the financial crisis. I was a big Dave Ramsey fan. I was also listening to 16 hours of right-wing talk radio every day. And we had the financial crisis going on, and I was working for a company, driving a truck, and I watched my weekly revenue for my truck go from $12,000 a week to $4,000 a week. And at that time, trucking companies were dropping like flies. There was a lot of really bad economic turmoil going on, and I was worried for my income. And so I went to my boss, and he explained some fundamental principles of economics to me, and showed me what a responsible business does when times are good, which is save money, and then when the times were bad, we still had security. And so, Dave Ramsey is just telling everybody not to freak out, not to freak out, not to freak out. And he did something I'd never seen it before, which was bring in historical context. And he read this op-ed article from 1999 from the New York Times, where someone, I don't even remember who, had written an article that said, because of this policy of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, this and this and this and this will happen. Well, here we are 10 years later, 2009, and every single one of those things had happened. And so it was an example for me of red and blue working together against me. So here were all these people around me that were suffering and dealing with anxiety and including me, people losing their homes. And I thought, the government is responsible for this. They're not the answer. They're the cause. And so then shortly after that, Obama comes in, and now everybody that was for everything before is now against that, and everything they were against, they're now for. And I watched this rearranging of the deck chairs on the Titanic, and I started backing away from right-wing talk radio because I just felt like they were all full of crap. And a guy named Mike Church still he was one of the remaining kind of halfway decent voices on right-wing talk radio. And he interviewed Ron Paul, and I went, well, okay, well, maybe this guy's not crazy after all. And then he interviewed Tom Woods, and the portal opened, and enter the old joke: what's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? And the answer is about 6 months. So over the next year or two, I began to read and be just exposed to new and old literature, from Hayek and Bastiat, and looking at the roots of the founding fathers and kind of the principles therein, and then getting history and context and taking the founders off of this pedestal that we put them on and saying, okay, well, I got to a place where I can look at, say, the Constitution, the founding documents, the founders, and I can say, okay, I recognize them and I can appreciate them, but I no longer worship them. So 2015 comes around, and I stumble into a church where an old acquaintance of mine had started a new church, and I hear him preach an in context new revelation of the gospel of Christ, and was just blown away. And at that moment, anarchism and grace just became this one in my mind, and I never looked back. And here I am 5 years later, and I've lived the last 10 months without anxiety, without fear, without trepidation, because I cannot be swayed with fear, and I cannot be swayed with shame.
That's awesome. You mentioned Dave Ramsey. I listened to him quite a bit for a long time. I was eyeball deep in debt at one time. Like I was working 2 jobs night and day, not sleeping, trying to just make ends meet. And I worked in the newspaper for 23 years. And back in 2000, I want to say 2007, somewhere in there, they stopped giving raises, like not even cost of living raises. And at first it was okay because I was making enough money to live on. But the longer it went, I got to where I was just struggling. So I was just adding money to credit cards, just so I could hang out with friends, just doing stupid things with money. And somebody turned me on to Dave Ramsey, and I started listening to him. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. There's got to be a better way. I've got to get out of debt because I'm miserable. And I'm to the point now that I'm out of debt. I have zero debt. I'm on the verge of buying a new home. And I'm very thankful for his teachings. I haven't listened to him in quite a while, but it has helped me so much. And you speak of not living in anxiety anymore. That's where I'm at. I don't worry about that stuff anymore. If something happens, I've got a little bit of money that's going to keep me afloat if I need to.
I have a friend of mine, my best friend Zeke, that says Dave Ramsey is the gateway drug to liberty. Because he gets you thinking outside of the mob mentality and not just doing all the other stupid things that your neighbors are doing. And that's an exit ramp. Now a lot of people choose not to take it, but there is an exit ramp after Dave Ramsey into liberty because you start thinking for yourself and then you start asking questions. And if people would only be willing to ask questions, I'm not trying to force answers down your throat. I'm trying to get you to ask questions because I know that if you will just allow that natural curiosity that was beaten out of you by the government school system, if you'll just allow that out of the cage and you'll ask questions, the answers are not hard to find. They're not hard to find at all. But we just won't question, the president said it, or the governor said it, or this one said it, or that one said it, or it was on Fox News, or it was on CNN, and it's just we're infected, pardon the pun, with this intellectual laziness right now, and it has led the entire globe into this pit of despair that we're living in right now.
Right, and if we could just get Dave Ramsey past that status mentality, because I feel like he might, because he can listen to his show, and he is a status. And if we could just get him past that, he'd be there. Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your path to anarchy?
Yeah, my path to anarchy was maybe not super long in time, but it was long in terms of the distance traveled. 2016, Jacob was a Bernie Sanders supporter, voted for Bernie in the primary, and then Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. And this year, 2020, didn't vote at all. So pretty long distance that I traveled from the Bernie Sanders Democratic Socialist positions that I had. First, I kind of went into being a little bit of a new sort of like neo-conservative Ben Shapiro type, like right-wing, libertarian-leaning conservative. Then fell in with a local libertarian group. Basically, long story short, got introduced to the principles of anarchism by people in that group. And then not quite 6 months later, I went from being a small L libertarian to an anarchist. And as far as like what convinced me, it was just the idea that, kind of what we're talking about today, the idea that no one should have special rights, that I started to challenge the idea in my head based upon the questions that anarchists were giving me, that there should be a group of people that have special rights to do things that we don't have, like to steal, to murder, to incarcerate people for certain things. So that was sort of the path that led me to anarchy, was kind of those lines of questions.
That's great. That is great. I always enjoy the perspective of folks who came from the opposite side that I did. You came as a Bernie Sanders supporter, and then I did not know you voted for Hillary Clinton. I was sitting here judging you the whole time you were saying that, by the way.
Yeah, it's not something I'm especially proud of anymore. Even at the time, I wasn't exactly a fan of voting for her, but I was sort of, my arm was twisted into it by the Democrats I was a part of, with the groups I was a part of. I was also a vegan back then. Part of local vegan groups, and of course they're all a bunch of lefties, and it's kind of like a little bit of whiplash sometimes when you wake up in the morning and you like go on social media and you see posts from a few years ago that you made, and you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe I said stuff like that. Like if I saw some of the things I said back then now on someone else's wall, man, I would be on them in a heartbeat, just like a cheetah in the wild, just like pouncing on them.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen Facebook posts of mine or memories of mine on Facebook, and I didn't realize it was a memory of mine at first. And I started to jump on that post and start grilling that person on what he was saying. And then I realized it was me that I was fixing to start grilling.
Well, I fortunately for me, I joined Facebook in 2009, and I had already kind of fallen over the edge. And there's a few posts that will pop up from mid to late 2009 that I said some pretty stupid things, but I have been spared the shame of the Facebook memory because most of mine I had already started at least embracing the idea of liberty. So
mine are pretty gross. I'm not going to lie. I've had some pop up recently when I started my transition into understanding what liberty was. So those are a little more comforting. But some of the old ones, man, back in my old neocon days, whew, it was gross. I mean, it was pretty bad stuff. But I'm going to read a quote before we get started. And I think it might play well into what we're going to talk about. It's a quote by Larkin Rose. And y'all both know who he is. He's very he doesn't apologize for any of his words, and he's very upfront about what he believes. And I think that's what we need more of, because a lot of what we talk about is going to hurt folks' feelings, but that's okay, because my feelings had to get hurt at some point before I had to understand where I was going and where I was coming from. And once my feelings were hurt and I recognized that, okay, maybe there's something to this, then let's look more into it. And that's kind of how I got to where I was at too, by getting my feelings hurt. But here's a quote. It says, "The truth is, one who seeks to achieve freedom by petitioning those in power to give it to him has already failed, regardless of the response. To beg for the blessing of authority is to accept that the choice is the master's alone to make, which means that person already, by definition, is a slave." Do you agree with that, Chris?
I do.
Jacob?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, great. Now let's start with Chris. What is your understanding of rights, or what is a right to you?
A right to me, trying to put this into my own words, is we are kind of pre-programmed in America to just repeat what was written in the founding documents about life, liberty, and property. And so trying right now to not plagiarize that and come up with my own words is a little difficult. A right is something that cannot be taken away from me, right? Without there being some sort of harm. So if you put plastic over my face and take away my right to air, I'm going to die. So to me, a right is something that if it is infringed upon or if it is restricted, then it brings harm to me. My right to enterprise, my right to travel, my right to own property, my right to defense. If any of those things is restricted in any way, then I'm going to be harmed. And my having a right to travel, a right to property, a right to enterprise, a right to defense, just simply being able to engage in those rights does not bring harm to anyone else by default. And so I guess that's the best way I can put it. Rights are things that, if taken away from me, will bring harm.
Okay, I would agree with that. Jacob, what about you? What is a right to you?
Well, I came prepared with the textbook definition just to kind of use as a springboard. The textbook definition of what a right is would be something to which you have a just claim to, or something to which you are rightfully due. So and we're talking about something in the moral or in some kind of legal framework, something that you are entitled to, so to speak, that is supposed to be yours. And then in libertarian philosophy, a lot of times what people do is they break it down into two groups. You have negative rights and you have positive rights. I don't know if you guys might have heard this dichotomy before, but for those who haven't, positive rights are things that people have to give to you, as in the surrounding society owes you something that is like they have to give you something that's like a positive attribution to your well-being. This would be like a right to health care, or a right to housing, or a right to social security. Those are positive rights. Negative rights are more they're going to sound familiar in terms of kind of like being from the Enlightenment philosophy, things we hear a lot when we're talking about the Constitution and the founding fathers, what they talked about as far as rights. Negative rights are things that that you have unless someone infringes upon them, being like the right to self-defense, the right to life, the right to engage in business without and in trade with people without being coerced upon. So that would be kind of how I would describe rights. There are things that you're entitled to, and then there's two categories that people will talk about, things that are your rights. They'll talk about either things that people have to give to you, or things that people shall not infringe upon.
Which do you prefer?
To me, the only consistent category that doesn't involve or lead to self-contradictions in terms of a moral framework would be negative rights.
I think that's one thing that bothers me the most about the positive rights folks is when you hear them talk about, I have a right to health care, I have a right to shelter, I have a right to clothing, I have a right to food. But what is missed in all that is when you are asking, or you're claiming that you have those rights, you're taking the rights away from somebody, or you're forcing somebody else to provide that right to you. Go ahead, Jacob.
Right. Yeah, I was going to add to that the reason that I oppose positive rights as an anarchist is that, like you said, it is you are requiring someone to do something. I mean, think about it in a legal sense. If you're saying that I am entitled to X, that X is rightfully mine, and they haven't given it to you, what you are creating is a situation where you are allowed to initiate force or coercion against that person in order to make them give you that. And, that ends up in either taking things away from people, which is theft, or forcing someone at the point of a gun, the gun being the state, to provide a service. And that's a form of slavery. So to me, positive rights always end in moral contradictions.
And it doesn't make any sense how people can think about that logically. And maybe it doesn't make sense to me, and I know it probably doesn't make sense to y'all, but that they look at that logically, how they can think that it's okay to force somebody to provide a service to somebody at the point of a gun. Go ahead, Chris.
I have a unique experience being on the road for 25 years as a professional truck driver. People do not, there's a disconnect. I think people, let me back up. In the trucking world, you'll hear people say, well, if you got it, it came off a truck, and you better thank a truck driver. It's kind of a, virtue signaling thing, but people don't understand that every single thing they have was at one time in the back of a truck, right? So when you walk into Walmart, when you walk into the clothing store, you go into the home improvement store, that stuff was not delivered by magical fairies in the middle of the night. Someone had to haul it. So look around you at any time, and anything that you have had to be delivered on a truck. Okay. Well, a lot of these Marxist progressives are all about labor. They love labor, labor and workers, and bless their hearts. Okay. All right. Well, you say you love labor. All right. Well, I had a lot of labor in delivering those products. So am I going to be paid for that labor, or am I not going to be paid for that labor? Because somebody's got to pay for it. So I think part of the problem is a disconnect from people not understanding the basic concepts of the economic system in which they live. And it's global. Trucking and logistics, and anywhere on the planet in the first world, you have this amazing logistics machine that delivers your Amazon package 2 days later. To see firsthand, from my perspective, the amount of logistics. And I made this comment back in April. I ended up giving a little speech in front of some freedom lovers, and I said, y'all need to understand that over the last 25 years, we have created the most fantastic, the most spectacular supply chain in the history of man. And y'all screwed it up in 2 weeks. You cleaned it out. You Why? Why did you do that? Because you watch too much television, you believe everything you see, and you went, oh, I need 7 months of toilet paper. And you destroyed this amazing, completely voluntary, completely decentralized. There's no federal department of logistics. That this was spontaneous order, and y'all effed it up so bad and so quickly that we still can't fill it up. We're still behind, and it's that basic lack of economics 101. And so they're like, oh well, I need health care, so somebody needs to give it to me. Okay, fine. All right, fine. Who's going to pay the doctor? Who's going to pay the pharmacist? Who's going to pay the nurse? Who's going to pay the light bill? Who's going to buy the furniture? Who's going to buy the tools and the instruments and all of this stuff that you want? You, on one hand, the proud Marxist, we must care for the worker. Okay, then pay the worker. How's the worker going to get paid if you want every damn thing for free?
Not to mention, there's also, to me, always like this naivety to those who say that they want a right to health care. Because, I run a business. If I'm doing work for someone's vehicle, like I work in an auto repair shop, if I'm doing work for someone's car or truck, and they say, oh, like it's my truck, but my dad or my uncle or whoever else is paying the bill, who am I going to get permission to do things to that truck if I need to get approval to do more work than was previously authorized? Am I going to the person who owns it, or am I going primarily to the person who's paying for it? I'm going to the person who's paying for it because they're the ones that have to foot the bill. Well, that's what happens in healthcare when you put that in charge or under the control of the state, is you no longer have control over your own healthcare decisions. You have relinquished that right. So if I say the state, hey, you're going to provide healthcare, single payer healthcare insurance and pay for everything and we'll have a centrally planned healthcare system, people think that sounds good because everyone gets healthcare, but they don't realize the many consequences, and this just being one of them, being that I have given up my right to self-determination over my health and my children's health, as far as the decisions that I make with any kind of health situation that will arise. I have given that right up to the state. And just looking at history, you should be really wary about giving people in the state any power over your lives, especially one of the most essential rights you have, which is the control. It's funny, people on the left will bark all day long about abortion, about it's a right to a woman to have control over her body. You'd think that the same people would be able to see the danger in giving this. They're like, we don't want the state to have control over health decisions related to the fetus growing inside a woman's uterus because we think that's dangerous power to give the state. But that's the only time they will ever make that argument. They can't see that argument actually applies to all other health decisions and not necessarily just to the decision of a woman who wants to not really make just a health decision concerning her body, but now she's making a decision for her body plus one.
I wanted to piggyback on what Jacob was saying. So I manage a fleet of 9 tractor trailers, and these trucks can and will break at the most inopportune times. And trying to get our trucks worked on is a nightmare because we have technicians, and I'm going to bring this around to healthcare, so hang on, y'all. All right, we have technicians that are raised and trained to press the button on the screen and wait for the computer to tell them what's wrong. And then we call them parts changers. They just stand back 10 yards and throw parts at it, but they don't know how to fix it because they don't know how it works, okay? Can you imagine what it would be like for me as a truck operator if I had to go to a central authority 1,000 miles away to find out how to fix my engine, to find out how to fix my transmission, to figure out how to change a tire? We have essentially done the same thing. The same process has played itself out in healthcare, where doctors are no longer really trained about how to fix the body. The doctors have become parts changers, just like mechanics have. it's like they're prohibited from using common sense and logic and critical thinking. And so I have found a guy here locally that we bring our trucks to because he is relentless. He won't stop until it's fixed. He has this amazing ability to look at the whole picture and look at how these different systems on these trucks play against one another. And well, if this one's not working right, let me check this other one. And so imagine what it would be like and through this COVID mess. It amazes me that a doctor cannot, well, they can, but they're blackballed and canceled and criticized and ridiculed. If a doctor makes a decision to prescribe, either a prophylaxis or an early treatment of COVID, well, that's not what the experts at the top of the pyramid said. And I'm thinking, y'all, we've got a couple hundred years of history that shows us that the dumbest people on the planet are at the top of the pyramid. So, it's probably going to be about time that we stop listening to the people at the top because they're all compromised. They're all bought and paid for. They don't have a clue what the hell they're talking about because they're being told by their benefactors or their supporters or their sponsors or however you want to, however you want to describe that stranglehold that the corporations have on these experts at the top. And then the information is supposed to trickle down. And so the irony is you have people that hate that trickle down economics, but they want trickle down healthcare. They hate big tobacco and big oil, but big pharma gets a complete pass. The pharmaceutical companies can do anything they damn well please, and you're supposed to shut up, slave, and take your shot. So I see it in other aspects of life that we have down here in reality on the ground. We have to deal and make decisions that are made more difficult and made more complicated by people that don't have any skin in the game. I just want my truck to run so I can pay my driver, so I can serve the customer, so I can get the job done. And I need a bunch of you idiots to get out of my way and just let me do that without your interference.
Right. And if the state was in control of that process, it would be like you want your truck fixed, but they step in and go, well, based upon our calculations, no, you don't want your truck fixed. What you want is a new truck. Or actually, no, we're going to go buy you a used truck of what we deem to be similar value. And then you inherit a crappy truck that, doesn't suit your needs and that has other problems. Or it's like, okay, well, you need your truck fixed, but we've prioritized your problem to being this important, and we'll get to it in 6 months, 12 months, that's what happens. People like to look at the bottom line in the countries that have the socialized medicine and go, well, look, everybody gets health care and nobody's paying this much out of pocket. And I'm like, yeah, but you end up with rationing, and people actually, a lot of times, if they have something serious, they're coming, especially people up in Canada, they're coming down here to America where we at least have, not that we have a free market of healthcare, but we at least have something that, a little remnant of it. And people come down here from Canada to get life-saving treatment because it's quicker and it's better than the socialized medicine that's rationed, not just from a supply side where they can only dish out so much at once, but B, because of that central planning, you've taken out the innovation and the drive to be excellent because of competition, which is what capitalism, what free markets provides. And so even though people look at America and they look at the bottom line and go, well, look at the costs and not everyone has equal access and this and that. But the bottom line is that if you're dying and you need the best doctors available with the best treatment available, America is still number one in those categories, like number one in 5-10 year cancer survival. We have the highest rates of cancer treatment and survival in the world. So the high end stuff is still the best here. And that's where people think we still have something resembling a free market in healthcare, which we don't. We have the worst of both worlds. We have not central planned healthcare. We have heavily regulated healthcare with lots of red tape and bureaucracy to deal with. It's a very corporatist setup, where it's actually enriching the people in big pharma and in the hospitals and stuff. We do have a lot of things that make it hard for our health industry to operate in a free market scale. It's funny, all this talk about with COVID, people were afraid at the beginning about what? About hospitals being overrun. Well, wouldn't you think that would result in like, oh wow, two new hospitals opened up over the last 6 months in my area? But that hasn't happened. And the reason that hasn't happened is because to open up a new hospital, the hospitals that already exist have to basically sign off on it and say, oh, there's a need for a second hospital. If that was true in the automotive world, and I was allowed to determine, hey, you guys have to come to me if you're going to open up another transmission shop or tire shop in the surrounding 50 miles, who's going to vote against their self-interest to go, yeah, I want competition? You can't trust anybody with that kind of power.
So I've got a perfect example of what Jacob was talking about there. So diesel trucks have emissions controls on them going back to really 2004, but they really got bad in 2008 to the point that a truck built from 2008 to 2015 is pretty much worthless. And it all started in California. So here's the example. In the port of Los Angeles, there were all of these little independent owner operators that would have really old paid for trucks that would run containers in and out of the port, either out to the rail lines or out into the distribution network in Southern California. And these guys were making a great living. They were getting by, and they had these little, small businesses. Well, the mental giants in California came up with these emissions rules, and overnight, all of these trucks that these guys were driving were now illegal. Well, the freight still had to get moved. So the carriers and the companies were like, okay, these people that have been providing the service for us no longer have trucks, but we need this stuff moved, and you can only move it with a truck. So here's what we'll do. We'll go buy new compliant trucks, and even the state of California would buy your old truck, give you one of their stupid words. I can't think of what it was, but they would destroy your old truck. They would crush this viable truck, and then they would help, air finger quotes, they would help you get into a new truck. Or the carriers and the companies would buy the trucks and lease them to the drivers. Well, now their margin has gone to zero. So now you have guys that went from making a living to now can't make a living at all because they're paying $800 a week for a truck. So when the LA Times writes a story about this, what does the story say? Does the story say, well, the government unilaterally stepped in and made the trucks illegal, and so because of the government, we had to buy new trucks, and because of the government, these guys can't make any money? No, that's not what the LA Times did in the op-ed. The LA Times came out and said, look at these horrible companies that are leasing these trucks to these drivers. They're greedy corporate pigs, and these people are making 5 cents an hour because of corporate greed. And I'm like, corporate greed didn't have a damn thing to do with it. The fact that the state stepped in here and unilaterally made their tool, their hammer, their screwdriver illegal, and then it had to be replaced with a $150,000 version of exactly what was being done before, because we couldn't let the freight set on the port. It had to be delivered. It had to get to the rail line. It had to get to the warehouse. Somebody had to do it somehow. So the company stepped in and tried to build a bridge. And that's what so many businesses end up doing. They end up chasing the state around. The state is going around and setting everything on fire. And then private business has to come behind and try to put the fire out and try to fill that gap that was created in the market to get the job done at the end of the day. And they've made it nearly impossible. Now, of course, the spirit of the LA Times article talking about this is, well, I'll tell you what we need. We need unionization. And so the Teamsters are ready to just come right in and we'll just unionize everybody. And it was the biggest scam in the history of man, but again, fundamental economics and history is not taught in schools. So people don't see the scam coming. But these people don't give a damn about the environment. They don't care about air quality. They don't care about cancer rates. They care about who's going to get me elected. And unions are really good at getting people elected. So we live with our business. We're very disobedient. All of our trucks are from the year 2000 to 2007. None of our trucks are legal to drive in California. And I'm ready for California to fall off in the ocean at this point. So it really doesn't matter. But we don't have a single truck that has less than 1 million miles on it. But yet we buy these old trucks for $10,000, put 15 or 20 into them to get them ready, hire a driver, train them how to be self-employed, train them how to be a servant, train them how to work with customers and agents. And we can take somebody from zero to $150,000 a year annual income in 2 years. Where else in the world does an opportunity like that with someone with no college experience can go literally from zero to 150 grand a year or more in 2 years? But we're training people up, and the first thing we have to do is unplug their brain, rewire it, and plug it back in. You're no longer a slave. You're now a servant. You go find somebody to serve. You exploit your uniqueness in the service of others, and you are going to get paid more money than you've ever made in your life. But we have so many people that believe the axis of the universe runs right through the top of their precious little head, and they can't even imagine the idea of self-sacrifice. They can't imagine the idea of putting someone's needs really before them, and it doesn't have a damn thing to do with wearing a mask.
That's great. Jacob, I'm going to go ahead and with your thought, and then I want to get to the second part of this topic.
Sure. Well, we talked a lot about the practical consequences of positive rights, and we've used healthcare as a very good example of that, because that's kind of like one of the most commonly cited examples of a positive right that is talked about a lot in our culture. And that's important. There are definitely logistical, and economic problems that arise when you try to make something a positive right and then license the state to be the entity that carries that out. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there. We also have the unforeseen consequences, which is that the more power we give to the state to try to give us these things that we want, that we think we are entitled to, we're giving the state more and more license and power to go and do things that nobody wants to talk about. I mean, and I've been railing about this for the past year, but even more so in the past month. The left wants to talk about how much that they care about people, that they want universal health care, they want these mask mandates and these lockdowns because they're trying to save lives, but they turn a complete, not all of them, but most of them turn a complete blind eye to the bombs being dropped in Yemen right now, to the unending occupation of the Middle East by the empire. And when you construct an entity that is large enough to have this power to tax and to print money and to have all this control over the economy in order to give you those things you think you're entitled to, people are not willing to, on balance, weigh the consequences of that, because it's not surprising that after FDR, after the state became more powerful in terms of being able to give people these entitlements and these positive rights, that's when the empire really started to escalate, and American interventionism and American bombs dropping on innocent civilians, killing innocent men, women, and children started to really pick up. And positive rights always end with giving someone a gun and the power to go use that force to give you what you want, but then people don't realize or think about what else that person's going to do with that gun.
Right. For me, I don't think we've seen in our history the hypocrisy on both sides, not just the left, but on both sides that we've witnessed with this whole COVID response. And what you were just talking about, Jacob, is going to segue nicely into the second part of this discussion. Hey folks, Craig here, and I'd like to let y'all know we are always looking for writers to contribute to our blog. I don't care if you have any experience or not. 2 or 3 of our contributors had no prior experience writing, and it turns out they have a real knack for it. Our project coordinator helps them put the articles together, and she publishes them on our website and Facebook page. And you will also have the option to come on the show and go more in depth about your article. So if you like what we're doing at The Bad Roman and would like to try your hand at writing, then send us an email at thebadromanpodcast@gmail.com. We're having a blast with this project, and we would love for you to join us in helping promote it. Now back to the show. So what I've noticed, and I think you two have as well, that the majority of Americans, and I stick to America because that's where I live, but you can talk to other people. Like I've had folks on the show from Canada, but the majority of people believe that their rights come from the state, and I think we as Christians know that that's not true. But even there are even status Christians that I think to some degree believe that as well. Chris, where do you believe that our rights come from?
As a follower of Jesus, I believe that rights come from God. That creates a little bit of an issue if I am encountering someone who doesn't have that same belief system that I do. But I just say that again, you're born with a right to live, obviously, and so whatever those life-sustaining principles are, then that's what you have. And I have the last almost year now, since 15 Days to Slow the Spread began, I have been around a lot of freedom fighters and people that are very passionate about their natural rights, and I've had some fun with them because I'll say, yeah, that's exactly right. Now you realize that every man, woman, and child on this planet has the same individual natural rights that you do, and they just look at you like you just fell off the alien ship. And to get them to break them out of that mold that somehow rights come from the Constitution, I can usually get them there because I'll say, okay, but the which came first? The Constitution recognizes something that already exists, right? Well, yes, that's correct. Okay, then if it already existed before the Constitution, then that means I had it because I was born. If I had it because I was born, then someone else has it because they were born. And if they're not free, I'm not free. So the challenge I think we face now is breaking down these man-made borders and barriers to get people who really claim that they love liberty and they love this they want the rights for themselves. Well, then they're going to have to understand that things like the Constitution is handcuffs on the state, not handcuffs on me.
There's one phrase that really makes me grind my teeth, and that phrase is constitutional rights.
Oh, yeah.
I hate hearing people say, my constitutional rights. You're infringing on my constitutional rights. No. You're being infringed on your rights. The Constitution does not grant you rights. Your right, just like you said, your rights were prior to the Constitution ever being written, before it was ever even thought of. And you make a great point that in speaking to Americans, they think that only Americans are afforded certain rights. Well, that's not true. Every person that was born was created by God. Why would he just give Americans certain rights and not those rights, the same rights to the folks in Yemen, like Jacob was talking about, or in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, wherever we think our enemies are? Do they not have the same rights that we do? Jacob, did you have something?
Yeah. So where I would try to explain rights come from would be to first, kind of work backwards from an understanding of what they are. I mean, I said at the beginning, rights are things that you are entitled to. Well, we've rejected positive rights because we agree that you're not entitled to things that require you to initiate force on other people in order to have, which means what you are entitled to is for people not to interfere or take away with your, what we call negative rights, which basically is, and I'm just going to use the term that is common in the libertarian world, it's basically just a backwards way of expressing the NAP, the non-aggression principle, which is just the idea that it is immoral to initiate force against someone. And going further from that, as Christians, where do we see that reflected in the Bible? Well, it's in the Ten Commandments, and it's also in what Christ told us. I mean, love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that second part, love your neighbor as yourself, I mean, it's kind of like the first part is summarizing the first half of the Ten Commandments, which is, don't bow down to idols, worship God alone. And then the second half being like, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, is kind of like the loving your neighbor part. And I would say rights come from the fact that we are, the Latin term is imago Dei, we are created in the image of God, and we are God's children. And we all have that spark of divinity within us. And when you aggress against someone else, not only are you just like breaking commandments, but you are almost, in a sense, when you're violating someone else, when you're committing aggression towards them, you're committing aggression against someone who is created in the image of God. So it's almost an affront to God. You're not loving your neighbor. You're not loving God when you initiate aggression. So to me, that's where rights come from. They come from the fact that we are created by God, and that God has told us that in order to be to follow in His example, in order to be living in the kingdom, to be following in His footsteps, these are the things that we have to do. We have to not aggress against people, because that is a violation of their rights. It's a violation of that spark of divinity that they were created with.
That's great, Jacob. I want to come back around to something I started with that I forgot to say. At the time of this recording, we're nearing the end of 2020, and something that I've noticed with small business owners, the majority of small business owners that I've been trying to talk to about this, is that they're going to have to take the lead in ending the COVID nonsense with the state. Now, what I'm running into though is we're just got to follow the rules. What rules? The state has completely stepped outside of their boundaries, supposed boundaries, and they are telling you how you can live, how you can make your money, how you can feed your children. These are not rules. These are the actions of tyrants, and you're going to have to stand up to them at some point and end this, because without you, y'all are. I'm afraid this is going to happen. I have a lot of friends that have small businesses that's going to fold at some point because they've cowered down to what the state's saying, and it is ruining their lives. Chris, go ahead.
The state has failed, and I've got a lot of really well-intentioned friends that, of course, still believe Trump's he's playing 4,572D chess, and this is the fourth act, and and just any minute, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and the election is not going to be stolen anymore. And I'm sitting here thinking, I hope it is. I hope it is stolen. I hope you believe that it was stolen, whether it was or not, because then maybe if Trump is no longer there for you to lean on as a crutch, you'll get off your dead ass and stop expecting somebody else to do it for you. So what I'm trying to get through to people, and it, because of my philosophy and the fact that I am not waiting for the state in any way to do anything for me. My customers are my heroes. My customers are my thin blue line. My customers and my associates and our drivers, and that's where my prosperity comes from. And we've got to get to the point where we finally just look up and say, okay, and I live in the state of West Virginia, and we've got this unhinged lunatic in the governor's office that goes, and I mean, listen, I can't recommend doing it more than once, but go to YouTube and watch this numbnuts press conference just one time. I can't do it anymore because I just end up screaming obscenities at my phone. But here is this unhinged lunatic, this third grade dropout, that people just fall all over his words because he's the governor. Our legislature is nowhere to be found. They are hiding in some bunker somewhere. So I just need y'all to understand there is no state solution. There is no political solution left for this. The only solution is for you to stand up. And I know it's hard. I had to deal with it when I was a kid, but occasionally you have to look at that bully and you have to bust him in that mouth, because there's one thing a bully understands, and that's a bloody nose. And so maybe it's time for us to stand up and punch that bully in the mouth and say, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. Write me a ticket, write me a citation, take me to jail if you have to. But y'all have only got so much jail capacity. So you can't get us all. Okay, so I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not social distancing. I'm not taking a shot. I'm not shutting down my business. I'm not going to do it. If you would have asked me in January of last year, where was the line that people wouldn't cross, I would have told you it was way, way, way back behind us. But there is a line that we're coming to some point, and I think that's where it's going to be important for people like us to say, okay, it's going to be okay. Why don't you, barber, stylist, restaurant owner, auto mechanic, truck driver, why don't you just tell the state to piss off and go find your customers and serve them? You don't need everybody's approval. You don't need, if there's a maximum capacity, our trucks can haul 5 loads a week. All right, 9 trucks, 5 loads, 45 loads a week, times 50 weeks in a year. That's it. That's all the capacity. Well, there's millions of people here. So there's millions of people that can pound sand. They can have a Coke and a smile if they don't like what I'm doing. I only need 45 loads a week. Everybody else can kiss my white ass.
I've been thinking about this lately too. If I knew how to cut somebody's hair, if I knew how to run a restaurant, I would be rich by the end of the month. There are so many people out there that are wanting some kind of social interaction with other people. They're tired of sitting behind their laptop on Zoom. And I want nothing more than to go sit at a bar, belly up to a bar and have a margarita. That's what I want to do. I want to go talk to some strangers and have a conversation. But I'm telling you, if some of these people would understand, and I think, and you brought up a good point, some of us are going to go to jail. Some of us are going to get ticketed. Some of us are going to get a citation. But once one person starts doing it, they have the ability to empower other folks to do it as well. And once more folks are doing it, the state cannot stop it. They'll be overwhelmed. They'll probably, and in my mind, will just give up. Otherwise, they'll just crumble.
Well, it's funny when Chris said what a bully understands as a bloody nose. We almost don't even have to do that. I mean, we outnumber the bully. I mean, the bully says, like we're at recess, okay, at school, and the bully says, all right, we're playing a new game now. You guys can't play soccer. We're going to go play kickball. If everybody doesn't want to listen to the bully, they don't have to. They can just keep playing soccer. We have to realize that the state is a bully, and they can talk a really good game, but in honesty, we outnumber them by a degree that is really hard to put into words. Like, we outnumber the state and these bullies by so much. We keep on thinking they have all the power. They only have power that we give them. And I mean, part of that is because we've been raised to accept these things. And that's one of the dangers of public schooling, and what I really like to call public indoctrination camps, is that they teach this sort of, they condition us to be subservient to the state, to think that we can't stand up to them. And that has to stop. We have to realize the power that we have. And we don't need to go pick a fight. We just need to stand up and say, you don't have the power to tell us to do that. We're going to go live as free men, as we are supposed to, as God tells us to. And one of the other things that Chris said that I wanted to speak to was, there's like a laziness that people have where, and sometimes even Christians, and I might sound a little critical here, but there are some Christians, both left and right, that say, well, we have to have the state because we have to do X because that's what the Bible says we have to do. I said, well, the Bible didn't say, Jesus didn't say, go license the state to take care of the least of these. Go get the state to love your neighbor. Go get the state to... No, he told you to do that. Stop being lazy, sitting down, going to a voting booth once every 4 years, and thinking that you're doing your duty as a Christian. Like, that is not what Jesus taught. Jesus said to go out there and be a servant, not to go license a bunch of thugs to go do it for you.
Couldn't agree more. We talk about that quite a bit on this show, about how Christians have the tendency to want to outsource their serving others through the state. And that is just asinine. I mean, it does not make any sense how you think that's going to work. And you can go vote every 2 to 4 years. And then what are you doing after that? If you think that's helping, what are you doing beyond that? Are you just sitting at home waiting for the next election? No, that's not what we were instructed to do. Preach the gospel. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. That includes anybody you come in contact with.
The revolution will not be televised. I don't know where that quote comes from.
I don't either, but I've heard that quite a bit recently, a lot lately, actually.
Yeah. Well, it kind of took on a new meaning for me last week, because I realized, okay, the reason the revolution won't be televised is because they don't want you to see it, right? So we're seeing, I've been following this guy, Ian Smith, on Instagram, that owns a bar, or not a bar, a gym up in Belmar, New Jersey. And he's a big statist and loves Trump and all this stuff. But dude is a monster, and he just, F you, I'm not going to do what you tell me. And he's been arrested, and they've barred up the building, and they busted the barrier down, and has been open every day. And the fines are in the millions right now. And he just keeps going, and we're seeing more of that. Restaurants refusing to close, gyms refusing to close. But of course, the news media, the American corporate news, which are terrorists, they're not going to televise that, so they don't want people to know. And what's encouraging for me is that it's not like the market has got to develop ways to get around this. They already exist. Blockchain, cryptocurrency, it's been around for 10 years. It's just a matter of time before these establishment firms like Facebook and Google get the rug ripped out from under them. And maybe they're going to see it coming, maybe they're not. But eventually we're going to move away, because this is like watching a bad movie. Like I would expect for there to be some cult film that, not everybody liked, but you'd love to smoke a joint and sit down and watch this dumb movie where the people were on LSD, and they wrote this script where it outlines exactly how the state and media has behaved over the last 10 months, and you wouldn't believe it.
Idiocracy.
Yeah, it's idiocracy, which we showed that to my kids 2 weekends ago, and it was hilarious. And I said, y'all, please understand, you're watching this in 2020. And my 11 and my 14-year-old just looked at me, and they were like, oh my God, this is incredible, That's what's weird for me. Dude, I'm so optimistic and positive about the future for my kids. And it hurts me to see these people, especially people of faith, the people that tell me they believe in Jesus and they believe, in the finished work of the cross, yet they're so terrified right now. And I'm like, y'all, Jesus said he came to give you peace. You don't have peace right now because you are negotiating with terrorists, and I thought in America we didn't negotiate with terrorists. So I'm fired up for the future. I think the next 5 years we're going to see innovation like we've never seen before, because the market is the machine that cannot ever be beaten.
Jacob, I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to let y'all plug whatever you want to plug, and then let you get out of here. That was great, Chris.
Yeah, my last words would be, Jesus says you cannot serve two masters. You have to decide who you're going to serve. Are you going to serve the world, kingdoms of the world? We all know Jesus, who offered him the kingdoms of the world? Satan did. So you're going to serve the kingdoms of the world, or you're going to serve the kingdom of God? The kingdom of God is not about licensing a bunch of mafia members, giving them a bunch of power to go and give you a bunch of free stuff. Okay? That's not what rights are about. Rights are about loving your neighbor, about not initiating force against anybody, about going out there and living as free men, living and viewing everyone in that light. So we have to go out there and, if we want to actually help people, Stop sitting around waiting for the state to do it. Go do it yourself. I mean, look at all the money that goes into politics and all the time, money, and energy and worry. It would take maybe only half of that to go out there and make a real difference in this world. So you want people to have health care? Great. So do I. You want people to have shelter and food and water and to live without worrying about where their next meal comes from? Great. I do too. But the state is not the way to do it, because the state's going to take all the resources and energy and devotion you give. You're sacrificing on your principles because now you're trying to serve two masters, and you're worshiping the state while you worship God. And you just can't do that. And then second, the state isn't going to take those resources and do what you want them to do with them. They're going to squander them. They're going to waste them. And they're going to take that power you gave them, and they're going to hurt people. Stop giving the power to the state that is yours to use to actually go and make a difference in this world.
That is awesome stuff, Jacob. Chris, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think I've caused enough trouble for one day.
I think all three of us have. This was a great conversation. And Chris, why don't you go ahead and plug whatever you want to plug, and then Jacob, you do as well.
My professional endeavors can be found at blueribbonlogistics.com. If you're a Class A CDL driver that would like to learn how to be an owner-operator without risk and, make $150,000, $200,000 a year, check us out at blueribbonlogistics.com. My political ramblings and ravings can be found on Facebook, facebook.com/unbeliever podcast. That podcast is on all the appropriate platforms. I'm on Instagram, ChrisPolk76, and that's about all I got.
Jacob, go ahead.
So you can find me on Facebook, Daniel 3, Biblical Anarchy. And you can also, there is a website that I'm working on, which might be done by the time this airs. It'll be Daniel318.com. And then podcasts can be found there, but also found on YouTube and on Podbean. You just search Daniel 318 Biblical Anarchy, and you'll be able to find all that.
Sounds great, man. I really appreciate y'all's time, and we will do this again for sure. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.